Theo, thank you for coming.
Thank you for having
Good to
me.
see you again. I don't think there's anyone in the country, and I mean this as a compliment, who is perhaps as vociferous in fighting for the minority shareholder than you have been. So thank you for the work over the years.
Thanks so much for that.
I want us to reflect on last year before we talk about this year. And I want us to reflect on last year, obviously, because of what happened with Steinhoff, but also the scandals that we now have seen unfolding in the Public Investment Corporation. When you look at corporate governance in South Africa, are you worried or you are happy that these things came out, because in part they do reflect mechanisms that enabled us to be able to see the things that were going wrong in those companies?
Absolutely. I mean, you'll probably recall that over Christmas, you know, I sort of looked at the Purple Group.
Yes.
It's a very small company, 280 million market cap. And you would probably expect all companies that are listed on the JSE or any other exchange to sort of practice good governance. And it was surprising to see that, you know, this company didn't practice good governance. So where does the mistake lie in terms of this whole process? You alluded to the fact of Steinhoff as well. I think it lies in the disclosure of the governance in the integrated report. So when King 3 came out, it was apply, and if you can't apply, then you explain the reason. King 4 comes out and they've changed it. They say apply and explain. So it's very difficult when you read through that governance to find the non-compliance in all this. And therefore you can't hold them to account. So if you look at the UK code is comply or explain. And therefore they would just list their non-compliance quite in a very short format, and you don't have to go through a lot.
I think for the benefit of people perhaps who don't follow these things on a day-to-day basis, just explain what you mean when you refer to these codes that you say one asks for comply and explain, and one asks for comply.
Yeah, so basically King 4 says you need to comply, and once you comply, then you explain the reasons how you've complied.
Right.
Okay. And those are the respective principles. Whereas King 3 was quite simple. It was comply, but if you can't comply, all you have to do then is explain the reasons why you don't comply.
Right.
That was a lot easier under King 3 than it was under King 4.
Yeah.
So let's say you read an integrated report, now you get this volume of comply and explain, instead of just getting to the nitty-gritty of where they don't comply. So where they don't comply, then you can engage with them at an AGM or engage with them behind closed doors as to the reasons why they don't comply, and then you can get to the nitty-gritty of governance.
Absolutely. And we'll come back to the AGMs, because that's an important forum that where I see you often and we do not see enough shareholders. I wanted to ask you, how did Steinhoff happen? Was Steinhoff the product of lax regulation, or it was because of sleeping shareholders, or it was because we had someone who was just bent or crooked?
I think it's probably all those factors. I mean, up until now, we don't really know the full extent of actually what went wrong. But there must have been something going wrong. So prior to them listing on the Frankfurt Stock Exchange, I think they listed in around about 2015, they were listed on the JSE. And once they listed on the JSE, they fell under the King 3 governance code.
Yes. And one of the best regulators in the world, the best, in fact, according to the World Economic Forum.
But I think those issues of them going wrong goes back many years in terms of, it didn't just suddenly happen in 2017 that there was suddenly this non-compliance or there was this so-called fraud or whatever. So you've got to look to your board, and you've got to look at the board and say, well, shucks, where was the board in all of this?
Right.
You had
you can't add the shareholders there in asking that question as well?
So then you have the board. I mean, they're ultimately responsible for ensuring that they adhere to, let's say, the King 3 code at that time, or the Dutch code when they listed on the Frankfurt Stock Exchange. But then you have the shareholders saying, have you done all this? So the shareholders then need to ask the question, yes, you do say you've adhered to King 3 in terms of the integrated report, but we want to question this, and this. So, for example, I would question the fact that, let's say, Len Koner, he was the chairman of Steinhoff, he was on the board since 1998.
Sure.
I would question the issue of a person being there for a very long period of time and his independence. So what you need is, in terms of holding companies to account, in terms of good governance, you need a more robust debate from your shareholders to hold them to account. So what shareholders have to adhere to is the Code for Responsible Investment, which is CRISA.
Yeah.
So CRISA is written, and then they should then account to their constituents, which are the man in the street who invests in those pension funds and provident funds.
Yeah.
For example, Government Employees Pension Fund
Yeah.
invests with, or gives their money to the PIC,
Yeah.
and the PIC manage it in terms of that. But the ultimate person in terms of who puts money in
Yeah.
are the actual government employees.
Absolutely.
So how do they hold the Government Employees Pension Fund to account,
Yeah.
and how does the Government Employees Pension Fund hold the PIC to account?
Absolutely. So if I'm hearing you correctly, the regulations are there, they appear to be adequate, but it's more your shareholders, your board, so your structures that are supposed to be holding management to account appear not to have been working. If we were to talk about corrective action, I wanted to get there fast, what would we be talking about?
Well, what we need to see is a more robust debate from the shareholders. We need the shareholders to hold the board of directors to account. What we don't see that in the public domain. So your asset owner or asset manager would engage with the company behind closed doors.
Yeah.
But somewhere along the line, they've got to draw the line and say, look, we're not getting anywhere with engagement.
Yeah.
Let's now go and attend the AGM, and let's raise these issues, maybe in a public forum,
Yeah.
to actually get to the stage of maybe...
But you and I, Theo, know this is not happening. I mean, we have attended many an AGM where, those things last on average 5-10 minutes and it's done and dusted. And it's always 90s or 80s or whatever is percent, those high percentage numbers in terms of agreement with whatever has been put on those AGMs. How do you get more Theos? How do you get more activism from shareholders, asking more questions out of management?
Yeah, I think then you have to step back, and one other thing that the Code for Responsible Investment has got is that it actually says that when asset owners and asset managers actually vote, they need to put that vote out into the public domain. Then you can have any NGO or any person from civil society to actually hold them to account in terms of their voting. So if you see the PIC vote for a remuneration policy, and you think that remuneration policy is flawed, you can then take them on and say, PIC, I don't really understand how you voted for this remuneration policy, because look at the flaws in terms of that.
And it's been made public.
Yeah, and that gets made public, and then the PIC will say, shucks, we need to apply our mind better here, or we need to put more resources in terms of this voting, because we're not really getting the voting right.
Absolutely. So we're talking about governance structures, and we have to talk about the governance structures of the PIC because it's so important in terms of share ownership on the JSE and the large number of people that it represents. What should be done? What can be done? I mean, there's a commission of inquiry that's opening up today. Is it next week? Yeah, it's next week, I think.
Well, I don't know. I think maybe if the PIC, I don't know if they're lacking in terms of their governance for holding companies to account. They might need to put more resources to this issue. They need to maybe gear themselves up and look at resolutions that come up.
But is that the PIC or is that the GEPF?
Yeah. So in terms of how it actually works, the Government Employees Pension Fund places money with the PIC. The Government Employees Pension Fund is the biggest asset owner, and they put their capital and their funds with the PIC, which is the asset manager. Yes. So if they feel that the PIC is not performing in, let's say, a responsible manner, they should hold them to account. So maybe the Government Employees Pension Fund, if maybe the Government Employees Pension Fund needs to hold them to account and say, well, we're not happy with X, Y, and Z. This is what we want to put into place, whatever that might be.
What about from the government perspective, in terms of, well, not so much the government, but the employees that are represented in the GEPF? Do they have enough say, do you think?
So I think in terms of the composition of their boards, they would have, on the representation, they'll have probably a government representation, they'll probably have a union representation, they'll have a representation from civil society, but maybe they don't have enough representation, because does the government employee actually know how the PIC is actually voting? Does he really understand his returns when he gets out his sheet?
Or they're just worried about returns?
Yes, but does he really understand those returns? Because it's so big. But is there a forum for an employee to meet with the board of directors of the Government Employees Pension Fund and say, well, I'd like to hold you to account? I haven't heard of anything like that.
If you had it your way, Theo, would you rewrite the King Code 4? Now it is, right?
Yeah, King 4.
King 4 now. Would you rewrite it? Or perhaps in terms of just improving general governance amongst corporates, what should you do?
Well, I'm not really a fan of the King IV code. I like the UK code for good governance. I think it's a lot stricter, a lot harder. I think it actually forces people to comply. The other issue which I don't like about King IV is the issue of the non-binding vote in terms of the REM policy and the REM report. I don't think it really goes far enough to actually get directors or REMCO to sit up and take note.
Absolutely. Theo, let's leave it there for today. Thank you for coming in.
Super. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm going to call you the lone warrior.
Oh,
and maybe
yes,
one day someone is going to write a book. Theo Botha is a shareholder activist. Thank you for coming in.